well, here we are. Looking at the end of part 3 today on this incredibly long journey of ours. If you're clicking on this and are an anime-only watcher, you're in a bit deep. This is firmly spoiler territory, so probably go pick up around part 3, volume 1. So we've seen Rosemine dip her toes in noble society, understand her new relationship with commoners, gather the ingredients for a potion to cure her chronic illness, and hints about a threat on the horizon with Arensbach. So what's awaiting her this volume? A lot that'll change her life drastically as she finishes her Jarive, sets plans into motion to make her mana compression method public, and readies for Charlotte's baptism this winter while the opposing nobles plot behind the scenes. But before we get too deep into this, here's your obligatory subscription reminder. It really helps my channel grow. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and dig into the end of part 3, Adopted Daughter of an Archduke. Our prologue begins from Benno's perspective. He's in the hidden room with Rosemine discussing business. The fact he gets private audiences with her has some of his new Lahanges up in arms, since they're missing out on some of the pivotal negotiations building this new industry. But Benno can't exactly let them come, since that would mean no hidden room, and Rosemine lacks the sense to understand complex noble euphemisms that border on random bouts of slam poetry. However, these guys do get to go to the castle for business, so they'll have to be satisfied with that. Meaning Benno isn't sweating it. They talk about the new paper, Rosemine hands it over to deliver to Heidi for some ink research, and he reminds her that she can't go experiment with it despite how much she wants to. They both have their roles to play, and Rosemine's is keeping the industry protected from other nobles. They discuss what to do with the firm paper, and Benno notes that her playing card idea could hurt Ingo in the long run. But again, he decides not to sweat that. Not unless Ingo decides to go make a stink about the sudden drop in business. Next is Bumps. And Johan's still the only person skilled enough to make the one part. But it won't be that way for long, since Zack let it slip that Rosemine wanted to give them a workshop, so now every young smith is mobilizing to impress her. Next comes letters, since Rosemine can't communicate with Thule without Lutz, but Benno says that he can't give the letters to Thule either, since he's avoiding the Gilberta company until the move is complete. And before you go ahead and ask, he can't exactly pass it on off to Karina to hand to her, as that would spread rumors about the new poor girl suddenly getting letters from the head honcho. What Benno is sweating is the lack of intel coming from the workshop with Gil and Lutz gone, as the reports are lacking any minor improvements that he used to get. He gets permission to head there and talk with Fritz. He's pretty surprised that Gil and Lutz are passing that information along, and promises to be more thorough in his reports from now on. Benno lays it out there that Gil and Lutz will probably be leaving the city a lot more often from now on. So Benno wants to ensure that he and Fritz are on good terms. Fritz says that there's really nothing to worry about, as long as Rosemine is the High Bishop, which sends up a red flag. Benno demands to know if there's any rumors about her stepping down, and Fritz states that it's a matter of course she'd leave the temple as soon as she's married, which will most likely happen as soon as she comes of age. But forget that bombshell. They'll be done with their private business talks long before then, since it's abnormal for members of the opposite sex to enter hidden rooms and nobles. That's how nasty rumors spread. Hidden rooms are very private places where nobles go to drop their masks and just be themselves. Only the husband or wife may enter the other's hidden room under normal circumstances, and being invited into one is horribly improper. Yeah, Ferdinand's overlooking it, since Rosemine's mental state isn't super stable to begin with, and this is all just to help her adjust to noble life. Fritz says that whole situation will probably end when she turns 10 and enters the Royal Academy. Benno thanks Fritz and rushes off. In the carriage on the way back, he's shaken, but Mark reminds him that they pretty much expected this. Rosemine will have to learn noble euphemisms so they can conduct business in the open. All they can really do is make sure Thule and Lutz get the etiquette training they need, as well as leave Gunther to guarding the priests on the way to Haas to keep her mentally stable. The prologue is really foreshadowing this event. Not just that it will happen, but shows that Mark and Benno are setting up plans so that when it finally does, they'll still have their connection with Rosemine. She's not going to lose her lower city ties to Lutz and Thule. Over to Rosemine now. She's heading to Haas to go buy some orphans. Who sent her the letter last volume laden with improper euphemisms? Rick did. He's the new mayor, so she's meeting him with Eustace and Ferdinand. So when they get there, they're expecting women, bribes, and wine. But instead there's just incense, flowers, and freshly squeezed fruit juice. Yeah, this actually saved their asses, because it demonstrated they didn't know what those phrases meant, meaning it's just a holdover from the previous mayor and high bishop. So Rosemine kicks off the meeting with a temple decree, stating they're sending 2 great priests over to keep an eye on Haas during the winter. Rick is worried that they're still not trusted, but that's not the main reason. Rosemine has Ferdinand explain that the real goal is to teach Rick and the people in charge of Haas how to talk to nobles, because the letter they sent was expressing an exchange of money, women, and wine for favors. That shocks Rick, and now he's worried he's going to be killed for disrespecting nobles too. But they put him at ease, saying he clearly didn't know. That's why they're gonna send people to teach them, which he appreciates. Now they move on to purchasing the orphans, which Rosemind's fine doing for them, but she says that she wants the youngest they have. She learned from her mistake with Nora, who's still struggling with temple life, since she was so close to coming of age. Younger kids should be able to adapt a lot easier like Marth did, which is just great, because young orphans aren't exactly desirable due to their inability to perform labor. So she buys 4, reassures the kids that Nora and the others are in the monastery, so they won't be alone, and then takes them there to get situated. Back at the temple, after the switch to autumn, Rosemind goes to the orphanage and workshop, having Fritz and Wilma select Grey Robes descend. These will be the ones to swap at the monastery, and 2 of them are going to go to the Winter Mansion with books to teach the mayor, as well as raise literacy rates and collect stories from the commoners. All a part of Rosemind's master plan, Operation Grimm. Yeah, a reference to the Brothers Grimm, who traveled Germany in the early 19th century collecting folk stories. I'd say that's pretty apt. But her other goal is to show Bridget exactly what she's getting her province into with the workshop. She takes her there for the first time, so she can see papermaking firsthand, but that's not all. She points out how the priests acted. Specifically, they stopped their work and moved to the walls to kneel. Since Ilgner is getting in on the ground floor papermaking, they're definitely going to have nobles come and observe when it's time to spread the industry. Because, you know, they're not going to come check Rosemind's personal workshop in the temple, for a number of reasons. No, they want to see how commoners in another province are doing the work themselves. So this means that Ilgner is about to get a lot of outside attention, so that friendly attitude they have could easily lead to a Haas-type situation. She's giving this warning out of concern. Bridget understands and says she was a fool for not seeing this coming in the first place. She sends word to her brother, letting him know to use the Grey Priest to get those dealing with the paper workshop and Summer Mansion up to snuff by the Harvest Festival, since Ferdinand's gonna be joining him. So comes time for the Grey Robes to leave for Haas. Rosemind tells them their respective missions. The monastery has a printing press now, the new orphans there will be coming to spend the winter in Ehrenfest, that way they can be taught proper etiquette at the temple, but the rest will stay there with Nora and the others. Everyone is given a diptych and sent off with Gunther ahead of time, but not the 2 priests going to Haas proper. They're taking Rosemind's High Beast. When they leave for the Harvest Festival a few days later, it's pretty much the same crew as last year, minus Daniel, who's going with Ferdinand. The reason being Rosemind is weak and Ferdinand isn't. They go to Haas, but rather than the usual festival, the town is dead silent. No one's outside and there's no big stage. They only see Richt, who says they don't really feel they deserve to celebrate when they're outside the Archduke's favor, so they only wish to do the ceremonies inside and pay their taxes. So they go to the huge hall inside where the stage has been set up. Fran does his usual Bible readings, Rosemind does her blessings, and everyone's pretty much sad as hell. It's making her feel pretty shitty, so with Eckhart and Eustace's approval, she mentions to Rick that she has some stuff to talk to him about in private. And that means she probably won't hear any loud commotion outside if they choose to go out and have some fun. He doesn't really understand, and that pretty much cements how much work the Grey Robes have ahead of them. So they explain that she's letting them have a wharf tournament to blow off some steam, otherwise the Winter Mansion will turn into a powder keg. After discussing the harvest and settling how the tithe will be distributed, since large chunks of hers will be going to the Haas Monastery and the 2 Grey Robes in the mansion, she heads back and they have their usual feast. People get drunk and their tongues are a bit loose at this point, as they start talking about how well-fed the orphans look in the monastery. And Rosemind pipes up to offer them to join the temple too, so long as they ditch their land and married lives. Things get pretty awkward at that, and Rosemind takes that as her cue to head to the monastery and get some sleep, all while Eckhart and Eustace handle the adult portion of the festival, much like they did last year. There, she pulls up to Gunther for a bit, and asks him if he has any stories to share since she's looking for commoner ones. She already got plenty from Effa because, you know, that's her mom, but she mentally remarks that she didn't really get any from her dad, so now's her chance. He regales her with the sweet tale about Thule and Camille finding their lost sister Mine in the forest, and bringing her home so that they can all live happily ever after. Yeah, she appreciates that quite a bit, and that night she had a dream about going home to the lower city. No more noble baggage or temple shit, and she was finally able to laugh with her family like she used to. The next day, after ensuring the new orphans are sent off, and Leslie was loaded with some extra supplies for the mansion Grey Robes to clean and such, she heads off to take care of her tax crap. And once all that's taken care of, she heads back to the monastery and reads, since the orphans and Grey Robes already know what to do. Too bad her real books are already packed up and headed to the next town, so she has to make do with a picture Bible while she waits. But it gets the job done. Eustace and Eckhart arrive and he asks her what made her make these. Rosemind obviously wanted books, but why a Bible in particular? She explains that she only ever read the Bible, and she feels one must read new books in order to make some. So she asks Eustace if he ever plans on giving her a gift, make it a book. he steps up as Riarda's son, and scolds her to not say those type of things in public. Yeah, because it invites bribes. They then go about their usual Harvest Festival march as they'd done previously, with Rosemine working herself practically to death, requiring multiple potions to stay functioning. When they arrive in Dorvan, it's the day before the night of Shutsaria, and they just barely made it. She's thrown into bed with a potion to rest up, since Ferdinand handled the Harvest Festival already. In the morning, he makes her work so she'll be exhausted and want to go to sleep that night before harvesting. That way she won't get tired in the middle like she did last time. It also helps that they have the schedule a lot more refined this year, meaning she can also just sleep in longer before they have to leave. But as they're working, they get a message from Karstedt saying he's due to arrive soon and have lunch ready. Karstedt's a fairly serious and minor character, but I love these little bits of characterization that make him feel more rounded. Like, yeah, there's clear affection for Rosemine as his daughter, but also there's a subtle love of food in there, because he sends that message saying he's arriving soon, but he's already visible through the window, meaning he's gonna be there in like 2 minutes. So he gets there and has some news. Everyone clears out of the room, save the guard knights, and Karstedt drops a sound-blocking magic tool. They want to know what happened in the castle, but it's less that and more something's on the horizon. He says the former Veronica faction is looking to revive as the new Georgine faction, but Ferdinand shoots this down, saying she can't maintain a political presence when she's outside the duchy, but some members of that faction are trying to rally around Wilfried. He's merely a figurehead though, since it's more that he's a symbol of opposing the Archduke as he's the one who invited Georgine back. Basically, her visit to Ehrenfest last book set back all the progress they've made by building the Florencia faction and getting her the right to be in charge of Wilfried's education again. But while they've not made any open moves just yet, they're currently spreading rumors during the hunting tournament going on. If only that were true. So Rosemine asks what she should do, so they all say to be on guard and pretty much ask Ferdinand before she does anything. But that can all wait till they're back at the castle. Now it's time to secure the Ruelle for Rosemine's Jarif. They're out at the tree, and Ferdinand makes the smart move to call the forest around it a bit, all to make sure the swarming Fey beasts don't jump onto the Ruelle tree like they did last year. So with that, everyone gets into position, and Rosemine fires off Angrief's Blessing. The Fey beasts start to swarm, and it's zero problem this year, with Ferdinand, Eckhart, Karstedt, Bridget, and Daniel. In fact, they try multiple times to get Daniel to fall back and take a recovery potion, but he declines because he didn't need it just yet. When he does finally fall back, he communicates to the others so they can fill in the gap he made. Rosemine's impressed with everyone's fighting, but Eustace snaps her back to reality to gather the Ruelle. But Rosemine's also not the same as she was last fall. She's a lot more used to pouring mana into stuff, and she easily dyes the Ruelle without any issues. She cuts the fruit off and swiftly stashes it away in her leather bag for safekeeping. The order goes out to fall back, but she tells them not just yet. Daniel needs a high-quality face done to propose with. Everyone laughs at that, and she assumes that maybe she's been reading too many night stories. But no, she's right, he does need a face stone to propose, but this is something that's meant to be done in secret, not with the possible bride right there next to him. But they all slap Daniel on the back and tell him to go get one because it's gonna make a good proposal face stone. He cuts one, Bridget pretends not to notice, and they leave, with it all going a lot smoother this year. I think that pretty much reinforces my point from last volume that the summer ingredient went so well because they knew what to expect. This was their second time, and there weren't any issues. So back at the summer mansion the next morning, Rosemine heads on over to Ferdinand's room and is met with Karstedt, Eckhart, Ferdinand, and a sorry as shit looking Daniel. They order everyone else out of the room and ask her what the hell she did to Daniel. Yeah, I'm sure everybody can figure this out by now. Daniel's growth is abnormal. And no, not just his growth period lasting this long. The amount of mana he has is way too much for a lay noble to get. So she explains that she just taught him her mana compression method, and his growth is entirely because of his own hard work. Ferdinand says he wasn't informed that she had a mana compression method, and she retorts that he never asked. That's not a cheeky response on her part. That's literally a subject that's not been broached. If you think all the way back to part 2, compression does come up. He mentions that her growth as a commoner was most likely due to her compressing mana, but he never asked her how she went about that. He probably just assumed she was doing something similar to him. In fact, when she says that nobles could grow their mana at a young age by compressing, he calls her a fool because that's dangerous. So he asks why she didn't think to spread it all over Ehrenfest to make up for the mana shortage. But she replies that he's the one who told her that mana compression is dangerous, taught in the Royal Academy under supervision, and even stressed that it can get people killed. She didn't think it'd be useful to nobles who have magic tools, since they don't need it to survive like she did. However, things are different from even a few months ago. Ehrenfest is facing down a threat from a greater duchy, so they're gonna need more mana to balance that. Now, just to be clear, Damiel and Rosemine aren't being scolded for keeping this technique a secret. Everyone understands that he did so that he could have an edge. The issue is, Rosemine taught it to someone else, so because she already did that, she should be spreading it further. Therefore, she's got some conditions. 1, only those in her faction, 2, only those old enough to be in the Royal Academy, and 3, a hefty fee based on their status. That way lay nobles can also afford it, but add on a discount for subsequent family members. That way you're not punishing larger families. This is also going to be enforced with a magic contract, but she asks if it's possible if they can do it as countrywide, rather than a duchy one to prevent it from leaking outside of Ehrenfest. Ferdinand says it's possible, but it's going to cost a fortune, and if Ferdinand's the one saying that, you can bet your ass it's fucking expensive. He wants to kinda confirm something here, why she's so adamant on saving lives. So he asks if she's fine sending kids who could have been nobles to the temple. That way he can see if she's being serious about this age condition. And she replies that she'd rather have blue priests than a bunch of dead kids. So they settle on her, Sylvester and Florencia as the Archduke and the first wife, Karstedt as the Knights Commander, Elvira as the de facto faction leader, and Ferdinand, since he's a smart boy, to approve people before teaching the method. Ferdinand wants to hear this method, but she says he can after he pays up. Damiel asks if he's gonna have to pay, but she says no. He's just gonna need to sign a contract to make sure he doesn't spread the method. So with the whole compression business settled, Ferdinand hands Rosemine a stack of papers, with all the Georgine-affiliated nobles courtesy of Elvira. So she needs to memorize all these names and their connection. That way she can avoid problems down the line. Time for Ilgnir's Harvest Festival, and things are different. For one, Bridget got an ordinance before heading there, confirming the citizens are ready. But also they're asking if one of the Grey Robes there could be sold to Guy Ilgnir, because one of the Ilgnirites has fallen in love with him. And that's a first. And immediately Rosemine gets worried that he's being forced into this marriage. So when they get there, she sneaks off to visit Lutz, Gil, and the Grey Robes. The one in question's name is Volk, and he has indeed fallen in love with Karya. He's not entirely sure if this'll work, but he still wants to give it a shot. After confirming things are fine and it's indeed a mutual love, she heads back to her chambers and finds out that Ferdinand was looking for her in her absence. So, she's getting scolded. She filled out a list of Volk's skills beforehand, since sale of Grey Robes is in Ferdinand's purview. So while he's the one writing the contract, she's the one who has to list out his skills because she's the one most involved in his skills and training. Remember back in Volume 2 of this part when Rosemine joked that her kids were expensive? Here's that throwaway comment coming back to bite her in the ass. They go to meet with Guy Ilgnir and slip him the contract, which makes him go wide-eyed. Grey Robes usually go for like about 5 small gold, but Volk is experienced as a former attendant, so he was already gonna go for at least that. But with his knowledge of papermaking and printing, on top of his skills doing so, allowing him to be selected to go set up another workshop outside the city, yeah, he's worth 2 large golds and 2 small. Guy Ilgnir can't afford him, so that's pretty much that, despite him pleading with Rosemine. But she's been trained by Benno, so he's not going to get very far negotiating with her. As sad as it is for Volk and his prospective wife, there is no sale. But she offers the Geeb first purchase rights for a whole year. With how much paper sells for, surely they can make that much. After they leave the room, Rosemine muses that Bridget's brother kinda sucks at business, and Ferdinand says that he's definitely lacking skill there, which is a pretty fatal flaw for a noble, especially one getting involved in a new industry. Hence why her former fiancé thought he could take over the seat of Guy Ilgnir rather easily. After that, she meets with Gil and Lutz, and hears that they have 3 new types of paper and some materials to experiment with back in Ehrenfest that could yield even more. Once the room is clear of anyone unfamiliar, Rosemine leaps into Lutz's arms and he asks her how her gathering went. She's now the proud owner of all 4 seasonal ingredients for her Jarif. At the Harvest Festival the next day, the festivities and ceremony go off without a hitch. This is the Plankton Company's first time seeing a Harvest Festival, so they're all pretty hyped. Rosemine pulls Volk aside and tells him that she's leaving him in Ilgnir so that he can make the money to earn his freedom, with Guy Ilgnir having the first purchase rights. It's gonna be hard, but she encourages him, and then they head back to the temple with everyone else. Back at the castle, she and Ferdinand are there to deliver the Harvest Festival reports, but Rosemine is more focused on making her Jarif, so she can actually be healthy. But on her way to her room, Riarda informs her that she's due to greet Charlotte for the first time properly. Her baptism is in the winter, so she's currently gaining some leadership experience by overseeing the setup of her room in the northern building. And since it's a girl's room, It's on the same floor and next to Rosemine's, which means she sounds immensely more competent than Wilfried already. And speaking of, Rosemine bumps into her outside her room. As soon as she sees her, Charlotte beelines on over with a huge smile. She calls Rosemine her big sister, and that's about all it takes to win her over, and asks her if she can greet her properly despite not having her ring yet, basically as practice. She delivers a fine greeting, and Rosemine praises her. This little interaction is all it takes to put Charlotte next to Thule in Rosemine's pantheon of angels. That relationship maintains as Charlotte loves Rosemine, and Rosemine supports her in turn. This dynamic doesn't really seem odd because it's our first impression of an Archduke family, but when we get to the Royal Academy, we'll see how strange this is, that they're actually supporting one another and are on good terms, despite the fact that they're supposed to be rivals for the seat of Aub. Charlotte asks that since her baptism is in winter, if Rosemine will be the one to perform it, and she says that she'd like nothing more, so long as Ferdinand allows it, meaning she needs to ask. But since they're hitting it off and so they can spend more time together, we are to suggest a tea party, and Rosemine is thrilled with the idea, but unfortunately duty calls. It'll have to wait until after her meeting with Sylvester. She leaves Charlotte, races off to Sylvester's office, and immediately says Charlotte is very cute. Sylvester of course agrees, but the conversation is set back on track before the two can get too far off the rails on a Charlotte tangent. Since the crop yield was so good again, they're gonna have her do spring prayer in the Central District next year too. And next comes the compression method. Sylvester wonders if it'll still work for adults who have stopped growing so they can fit more mana inside themselves. And she's not really sure, but offers to let him experiment with it when he learns it. Then they settle on the first group to learn will be her guardians and their families. So Karstedt's family, Sylvester, Florencia, and of course Ferdinand. They want to get this compression method tested as soon as possible so they can spread it on to the Guard Knights. And if all goes well, they can get word out over socializing. But Rosemine's not really interested. She wants to go to her tea party and make her a potion, since otherwise she'll fall behind. Everyone else will now have a ton of mana, but she'll still be weak. But Ferdinand tells her there's really no rush on the potion. Why is that? Even if she makes it, she won't be using it just yet. A Jareve isn't your normal potion. It's something that'll knock you unconscious for days to even months, while your body focuses on removing mana clumps. Now, she's not going to use it yet because winter means the dedication ritual and socializing, and then there's spring with spring prayer. Summer's going to be her best bet, but there's a small problem with that. Georgine's supposed to visit again, and they can't show weakness to an outside duchy. Well, then you have fall, but there's the Harvest Festival, and then after that it's going to be winter with socializing and the dedication ritual again, followed by spring with the spring prayer. So you see the problem here? It's going to be like a year and a half before she actually has a chance to use this potion. Aside from that, she'll need to brush up on the winter baptism ceremony, as the noble one is a lot more involved, so now she has homework on top of her weakness. Despite her protests, to impress Charlotte, she'll have to wait at least until spring prayer is over for a chance to use her potion. Oh well. Better go to the tea party then. There she sits with Charlotte, and it turns out she's heard a lot about Rosemine from Wilfried. He showed her the books, Karud and cards, all while praising Rosemine. So Charlotte's quite taken with her already. She even loves the hair stick she has in, and Rosemine offers to let her wear one during her baptism, allowing her to decide when suddenly Wilfried burst into the room, barely announced and not even invited. He tells Charlotte to get away from Rosemine, because she's deceived them all, apparently. They're both obviously confused at that statement, but he's having none of it, and races over towards Rosemine. Whether he was planning on hitting her or just yanking Charlotte away, who knows, because Angelica didn't even give him the chance. She bounces and holds him down, while the other Guard Knights are baffled on what to do. He protests obviously, but she's not letting him up. Right as Rosemine's about to order his release though, Wilfried blurts out a big problem, saying his grandmother told him that she and Ferdinand plotted her downfall. That's a pretty big red flag there. So Rosemine asks, when did he speak to Veronica? And when that question hits the room, suddenly everyone's nervous. So much so that Riarda rushes out to go get Sylvester at Rosemine's request. While she's gone, everyone's asking Wilfried why he'd do this. And Lampric's particularly hurt, but Wilfried doesn't really understand what the problem is. All he did was meet with Veronica. Can't be that serious, right? Well, it is. Sylvester comes in, has chairs set up, and has Wilfried released. He has a seat in front of Sylvester, while Rosemine, Ferdinand, Florencia, and Charlotte are all sitting next to him. Ferdinand is taking notes, and this serious family discussion starts by asking when he met Veronica. Remember when Karstedt mentioned all those rumors flying around during the hunting tournament? It's held at the same time as the Harvest Festival in the Noble Quarter Forest, where nobles hunt babies for glory and to provide food for winter in the castle. This is the hunting Sylvester thought was boring back in part 2. Through some clever tricks, Wilfried went to go play with some of his friends. They ditched his retainers, and just so happened to be near some nobles talking about Veronica's imprisonment, and just how unfair all of it is. Now, Wilfried's been told the story, that Veronica used Sylvester's Archduke seal while he was away at Bezewan's request, but these nobles aren't saying Sylvester lied, but that Rosemine and Ferdinand caused this situation, and Veronica's really the victim here. They said there's an ivory tower in the forest where she's being held, and to go ask her himself. So he led his friends out on a little adventure, and they actually found it. Outside was a man who told them only the Archduke and his kids can enter, which turns out to be true. All of Wilfried's friends tried to open the door, but he was the only one able to open it, and went inside by himself. There he met Veronica. She told him her story. He begs Sylvester to free her, and he loses his shit. He yells at him, saying that protesting his decision as the Archduke is nothing less than treason. That Sylvester himself, Ob Ehrenfest, is the one who discovered her crimes, not Rosemine or Ferdinand. Florencia is upset because Wilfried broke the law here. Entering the ivory tower without permission is a criminal offense, with the assumption that you're either attempting to aid the escape of the person held within, or plotting a rebellion. Yeah, this is exclusively a prison for members of the Archducal family. Even if he didn't mean it, he still did the deed. Ferdinand's feeling pretty damn righteous about now, because he demanded Wilfried be disinherited back in Volume 2 of this part, but honestly this is a hell of a devious plot. The people who spurred Wilfried did so indirectly, through their kids and with rumors alone. Really, there's nothing that can be traced back to them. But to clear the air, Ferdinand has Rosemine tell Wilfried her truth, how Veronica and Bezewans tried to get her abducted from the duchy and sold as a slave. Well, omitting the whole commoner origin thing, but that does give Wilfried a new understanding, that she helped him so much and he turned on her so easily. And Rosemine even says here that she doesn't like Veronica, but to Wilfried, she's his grandmother, so she can understand why he'd believe her. Ferdinand says Wilfried needs to be punished, and the ones that come to mind are sending him to the temple, or locking him in the ivory tower with Veronica. But Rosemine steps up and says that he was clearly tricked and a pawn here. But a pawn how? For what reason? Who'd even do this, and why? Those are the questions hanging over this whole discussion. Wilfried says that he sees that Veronica was the one whose story doesn't add up, and apologizes to everyone, even Ferdinand. Ultimately, they come to the conclusion that this was just a provocation to see how they'd react. In Rosemine's experience, not reacting would be the best way to get under their skin. But that won't fly here. Wilfried committed a crime and needs to be punished. So she says do as thus. He loses his guaranteed spot as the next Archduke. Also, they're going to use the memory searching magic tool to get the nobles who tricked him into this, marking him as a grave criminal in noble society. Everyone there accepts that, and it's pretty much settled, with Florencia and Charlotte particularly happy. As Wilfried talks to his attendants and asks them to stay with him, Ferdinand approaches. He gives them an exceedingly rare compliment, saying that if he works hard to overcome this stain on his reputation, he'll continue to grow, and his sincerity is a hard virtue to acquire. Wilfried is, of course, shocked and thanks him, before correcting calling him Ferdinand to uncle, as a show of respect. Back at the temple a few days later, Ferdinand calls Rosemine into his hidden room to talk about their information gathering from the incident. This is where the gravity of the situation really sinks in, that this was not just malicious, but done without regard. The people they're dealing with here only wanted to stabilize the duchy, because whether Wilfried was punished or not didn't impact their plans, because you can't really rally around a criminal now, can you? Not just that though, they're clearly not Veronica's ally either, as they'd have taken the chance to free her or pass some information along, and they didn't. Plus, they covered their tracks really well. In the meantime, while they investigate, it's time to brew the Jarive and teach the mana compression method, as this moved up Ferdinand's already pushed up timeline. The next day, Ferdinand creates a new hidden room in Rosemine's High Bishop's chambers to use as her workshop, where he uses a small teleportation circle to bring a bunch of little things from his to hers, like a big cauldron, stone bathtub, tables, benches, and while he measures some non-face stone ingredients, she's gonna handle the ones with her mana. She's instructed to add them one by one into the cauldron, stirring until these stones melt with an ore-like magic tool. This follows chronological order, starting in spring. Once they're all melted, Ferdinand adds some more stuff before finishing the mixture with a thick black liquid. That makes the potion grow in volume. She thinks it's gonna overflow, but Ferdinand isn't that careless. Now she has a cauldron full of Jarive. But surely that's too much to drink. Here's where we learn that a Jarive is for sure a weird potion. It's not one you simply drink, and no, it's not a precedent for that either. Remember the eye drops last volume? You're meant to only swallow about half a cup of this stuff before climbing into a bathtub full of it. That's when you pass out submerged in it, and it will dissolve the rest of your solidified mana. And yeah, you don't drown or anything inside it. So Ferdinand slaps a cloth with a magic circle on it to prevent the potion from spoiling. And now it's ready to use whenever she needs it. Oh, surely she won't use this prematurely and in an emergency, right? So with that out of the way, she's back at the castle, collecting the fee, which half of is being given back to Sylvester to cover the magic contract costs, and they get down to it. She shows them the cape folding, which everyone but Ferdinand is impressed by, and it works for them. But apparently Ferdinand's already been doing something similar. That is until she shows him the next step, where she sits on the bag to squeeze out all the air, and suddenly he's gulping down a potion to fill the space he just made. This process can make people sick with something akin to a hangover if they're not careful, and Ferdinand even comments how mentally strong Rosemine is, since it turns out her compression method is a lot of work. Now it's time for the climax of this volume and part. I had mentioned at the end of part 2 that I thought that climax was a little sloppily handled, but part 3 shows a remarkable growth in the handling, where this situation's been foreshadowed extensively throughout this part. Rosemine's also an active participant, rather than just an object being acted upon. On top of that, the noble plot this time is well layered with shocking cruelty, and deception woven in masterfully to be incredibly convincing to the audience. So let's dig on into this and find out how part 3 comes to an end. It's already the start of winter, meaning it's time for the baptisms. Once the lower city is taken care of, Rosemine gets a glimpse of her family and sees how much Camille has grown, giving her a goofy smile. Ferdinand scolds her, but he really has no room to talk since he's looking in rough shape himself, the reason being he's abusing her compression method. They head off to the noble quarter after some rest and a few days of study for the big ceremony. She's dressed in her ceremonial robes, and she and Ferdinand enter the chamber together. He's annoyed by how slow she walks, but they make it up to the stage eventually and the ceremony kicks off. Well, not yet. There's the announcements that Wilfried was punished, and they found the nobles who got him into this situation who also got some minor punishments themselves, like fines and demotions. The real problem for them is, there goes their future career prospects, because now they're not moving up in the corporate world. The kids enter with Charlotte leading because she's the highest in status, but she's the last one for her baptism. Rosemine performs the ceremony flawlessly, and does a better job than Ferdinand did for her by actually telling Charlotte what her protections are, and Sylvester goes and gives her the ring. Now it's time for Charlotte to bless Rosemine, and she does so perfectly, with Rosemine returning one, but being extra careful not to bless her too much because that'd be favoritism. We already know that she gets worked up when family's involved, and that leads to big blessings and big problems. Now it's time for the Harspiel, and Charlotte's also good at that. Because unlike Wilfried, and as we've already been told, her retainers weren't slacking. It made her and her little brother actually practice and learn. So with everything done, Rosemine and Ferdinand race out during the gifting ceremony to get changed, and make it back just in time for the feast and socializing between all the nobles of Ehrenfest, since they gather on the first and last days in mass. So the big thing here is, nobles are probing Wilfried for his transgression, all to see if he's against Sylvester now. But Rosemine's stepping between them to reply that he's not, and to back off. This is all veiled in complex euphemisms, and when Wilfried and Charlotte ask what she's doing as the three go about and greet nobles, she explains that she's been told to play interference. The reason why is Wilfried's too dense, and Charlotte's still too new. Basically, Rosemine was the only one remotely capable. And that's fucking terrifying. With all that socializing finally done, it's about time for the kids to head to bed, and the adults to kick this party into gear. So at their guard nights, the three kids head off to the northern building, but along the hall connecting the two buildings, Rosemine notices a window moved, and that's kinda weird. She has Daniel go check it out, and it's unlocked, which is even more weird. Then 10 dudes dressed in black leap in, and the weirdness just skyrockets. Yeah, we've seen this song and dance before, Black Cloak's trying to nab Rosemine, but they have an actual fight on their hands with so many guards between all three of the Archduke's children. Wilfried is closest to the main building, but Rosemine and Charlotte are closest to their rooms. Now the northern building has a barrier to prevent this sort of shit from happening, so Charlotte makes a break for it, but that was a mistake. More dudes jump in and nab her. She's then thrown out another window onto an awaiting high beast. Rosemine throws caution to the wind and charges after them on Lessie, with a shout for Wilfried to go get help. But she's not alone, since Angelica hopped on top of Lessie and they're both chasing whoever this noble is. All while Cornelius yells after them that they're being reckless. Rosemine catches up, and when the noble realizes he's not getting away, he chucks Charlotte off to the side and flies in the opposite direction. Angelica leaps to catch Charlotte, but she's too stupid to have a backup plan since she can't summon her high beast while using enhancement magic to boost her physical power. So they plummet to their death anyway. Luckily, Cornelius swooped in to save the two of them before they hit the ground, but that left Rosemine all alone. Suddenly Leslie's being dragged to the ground and she doesn't know why. When she catches a glimpse in the moonlight, she sees there's a net-like magic tool wrapped around her panda bus. She's thrown to the ground, and when she pokes her head out the window because Leslie's on his side, she's snatched out of her high beast with bands of light. The noble mentions that some lady wants to make Rosemine pay, and he's looking at her with the same eyes that Bindewald and Beze once did, that of an object, because this person views her as a commoner. Before she can get a blessing off to protect herself, she's kicked and has a bottle shoved in her mouth. The liquid inside tastes like crap as it spreads to make her mouth go numb. Yeah, something's telling her it's not good to drink this, but the guy makes her do it anyway by plugging her nose. Next thing she knows, her body has gone limp and she can't move. Then she's thrown into a bag, passed off to another guy, and strapped to a horse as the noble goes off in a different direction, leaving her with these random kidnappers. She only has the haunting noise of Cornelius's voice getting further and further away as he looks for her. Yeah, something tells me that she's in a pretty dire situation. All hope seems lost. Until after a short while, she hears a shout from a man, saying to unhand his granddaughter. Bonifacius shows up, and smashes the dude's head in before loosing the sack, and throwing it to get Rosemine out. She's too weak to even talk at this point, so she just flies out, leaving a confused Bonifacius, hurtling straight for a fucking tree branch that's probably gonna smash her on impact. Before she slams into it and actually dies, Ferdinand saves her at the last second on his high beast. But it's not all sunshine and roses. She can't even open her eyes anymore and is barely breathing. He stuffs some paper into her mouth after smelling the potion, and immediately gets his answer. It's not good. He drenches some cloth in another potion, and shoves it into Rosemine's mouth, to make sure it seeps in and slows the poison spread. That way he can take her to prepare a proper antidote. I know, you want to call bullshit here because, like, why does Ferdinand have this, and how does he know about this potion? Immersion ruined, right? Hear me out. Ferdinand lived under Veronica. That woman and her lackeys tried anything and everything to remove him from the picture. So Ferdinand became as cautious and prepared as he is for a reason. And I would like to point out, he's also an incredibly skilled scholar and has done his fair share of dirty work. After some argument, Bonifacius lets Ferdinand go. Not before Cornelius shows up, of course, and returns her high beast face stone that he found. And then he races off to the temple as quick as he can. As soon as he's inside, he shoves her into Fran's arms, orders her to be changed into something white, and goes to his own chambers to get the antidote. Her attendants are all shocked and scared, but do as Ferdinand said. It's so bad, Fran has to even help her get changed, because Monica and Nicola can't manage when someone is literally dead weight. Ferdinand bursts back in, shoves the antidote down Rosemine's throat, and storms into her hidden room, only saying she'll be using her Jarive immediately. It appears he made it in time to save her life. Well, luckily they made the Jarive, otherwise she'd be fucked. While she slowly gains the use of her body again, despite being super weak, her attendants feel relieved. Once she's mostly back to normal, she dishes out some letters that outline her plans for while she's asleep in the Jarive to her attendants, saying to deliver them to Lutz as well. But ultimately she trusts how capable they are, so they can treat this as though she's staying in the castle for a while. She has Fran take her to her hidden room, but opening the door is a challenge, since her mana feels like it's stuck. That's a pretty big red flag for how dire her situation is. Inside, Ferdinand is using a pitcher-like magic tool thing to fill that bathtub thing with her Jarive, that basically links the bottom of the cauldron to that tool. He then pours a small cup of the potion, and has Rosemine drink that before slipping her into the tub. He trails off as he mentions how her mana looks, due to her lines being illuminated in the Jarive like when she had her medical exam, and suddenly she feels super tired. With his blessing, she falls asleep, and dreams of a fluffy pink world with paths blocked by large rocks, that she has to melt using a watering can. That's a clever metaphor. However, the can does run out, and refills itself over time. So she waits, gets a little sloppy and leaves a few undissolved, and heads along her merry way. Wanting some praise for all of her hard work getting rid of some of these rocks, she opens her eyes and sees a silhouette above her. She realizes suddenly that she's underwater, so she surfaces, choking on the liquid in her lungs. Yeah, it's Ferdinand, who'd have thought? And he comments on how she seems fine, so that must mean her mana clumps are gone now. Right? Well, not exactly. Turns out that poison nearly killed her. So yeah, her mana was hardening again if you didn't guess. While the Jarive they originally made was enough to do the job, with the added clumps forming on top of the old ones, it couldn't do the whole job now. But she is noticeably in better shape, deciding to take what little win she can when the alternative was dying. Rosemine then notices the stack of books next to her. They're all from the workshop, but they're not ones she recognizes. After the initial excitement and subsequent slap on the hand from Ferdinand so she doesn't ruin them, it suddenly dawns on her. She asks how long she was out, and Ferdinand replies that she was asleep for nearly 2 years. It's currently right after the Harvest Festival of her 10th year, meaning Rosemine is due to enter the Royal Academy in like a month. Now the Jari focuses all the body's energy on healing, meaning she really hasn't grown much. And even worse, since she was sleeping for 2 years, her muscles have atrophied pretty hard. Rosemine can now literally not even lift her head anymore. Yeah, so she's gonna have some issues. In the epilogue, Ferdinand returns to his room while Rosemine's getting changed after her awakening. She needs a bath since she was sitting in a potion for 2 years, so he's got some time on his hands. This is a relief to a lot of people, but Ferdinand is staring at a pile of face stones on his desk. He taps his stop against them all and says ordnance to turn them into white birds, and then gives them the message that Rosemine has awakened. Most of these are from Bonifatius, who sent them regularly asking for updates on Rosemine's health, to the point that Ferdinand was about to smash each one over his head. But sending like a dozen or more over to Bonifatius to repeat the same message 3 times is a fairly fitting revenge. He sits at his desk and contemplates Rosemine's future. She's in for a hell of a culture shock here, since 2 years ago feels only like a few hours ago from her perspective, but ultimately it's good, since they didn't have to push back her first year of attending the Royal Academy. Doing so would be a stain on her reputation. The part ends with an attendant telling him she's ready to have a real discussion to catch her up to speed. Well, after all that, it's hard to imagine what the side stories could even cover that would satisfy readers. You're probably dying to see what happens next and are just gonna skip this crap and dive into part 4, but that'd be a mistake. You'd miss out on, like, everything that happened while Rosemine was asleep. But specifically, you'd be missing the motivations or the plot that got her into this situation. So let's go ahead and get into what I shit you not makes up half of this book, the side stories. We begin with Bonifatius' side story from that night during the baptism. He's super proud of Rosemine for doing the baptism, and laments that he can't step up and beat the crap out of these nobles pestering her while she defends Wilfried. The reason being, he was told that he might actually kill her because Bonifatius is ripped as shit. Karstedt seems to think that that might makes right attitude is why Bonifatius wasn't chosen to be the next Archduke, but it's actually because he was avoiding the role entirely due to how bothersome being the Archduke is. And by the way, Bonifatius believes the whole he might actually kill Rosemine with just a touch, especially after that snowball incident last winter. He's also looking forward to the Archduke conference so he can spend more time with his cute granddaughter outside the public's view, since you can't even call him grandfather at an event like this. But when Wilfried and his retainers come back to announce the attack, Bonifatius uses enhancement magic on his eyesight to see if anyone's acting strange or knows what's up. He doesn't see anyone, and Karstedt orders the Knight's Order to mobilize while locking down the hall. Any nobles not currently there are suspect in the attack. Bonifatius lunges into action, saying he's gonna save Rosemine. And while Karstedt's obviously worried about that, Sylvester orders Ferdinand to go with him and keep him in check. But Bonifatius gives zero shits here. He's 60 and could probably run circles around all the archnobles there. He quickly catches up to the fray and literally squashes the heads of the attackers like pumpkins, all as he searches for Rosemine. Now some of them die on their own like the attackers during Spring Prayer in Part 2, there's a hint, but Bonifatius is on a mission. He gives no fucks. They can die on their own if they want, he was gonna kill them anyway. Angelica shows up with Charlotte and informs them that Rosemine has been taken, so he races out into the forest and catches up soon, using his magic-enhanced eyesight, where the scene plays out the same. He fires a huge ball of mana that explodes, sending the horses racing. Then he crushed the one horse with his mana to get it to stop, and then crushed the rider's head with his boot. He snags the bag that has Rosemine and kicks the horse, sending it flying. I just want to say here, Bonifatius is a force in nature. Karstedt's fears are founded, and I fucking love him for it. After Ferdinand takes Rosemine away, Bonifatius and Cornelius locate the second horse and its rider, taking him into custody. They see a rot fly up into the air, and take their captive with them to find Angelica having a black-clad noble tied up. He's too heavy for Angelica to carry, but before they even take him away, they pull back his hood and see that it's Geeb Joisentalk, which is a hell of a Scooby-Doo moment. Who the fuck is Geeb Joisentalk again? It's okay, we've met him before. He's Rosemary's brother, the noble who interrupted Rosemine's first meeting with Guy Bildner last year, which means he's a distant relative of Bonifatius, being his son's third wife's brother, and that's enough to make him want to kill this dude outright. But he keeps a calm enough head and he throws him into jail, with Bonifatius and Angelica guarding him while they wait for Sylvester to hold an interrogation. The cover is even Bonifatius can't be left alone at the moment as a member of the archducal family, but really he just needs someone there to distract him so he doesn't kill this dude outright. Yeah. Angelica and Bonifatius bond a bit, because she compliments him on his strength, but he returns the praise, saying Rosemine was being reckless so not to beat herself up over not saving her, and it's very likely Angelica saved Charlotte's life, though she is being pretty hard on herself for not having enough mana or being skilled enough to summon a high beast while using enhancement magic. That way Cornelius could have protected Rosemine while she was saving Charlotte. She is increasing her mana with the Rosemine method, but she just learned it, so it's not showing a ton of results just yet. Bonifatius now wants to learn it too, but he'll have to ask Sylvester. But since Angelica is showing promise, the instinct that Bonifatius values, and her capacity will surely grow, he takes her on as an apprentice. But as he starts to talk about learning, Stenluke speaks up and throws Bonifatius for a loop. Since Rosemine gave her that sword, he wants it too, but Angelica uses the flawless logic that Bonifatius wouldn't want to part with something given to him by Rosemine, so he decides not to take her blade. Cornelius comes in to say that Sylvester is ready for them. Most of the nobles in the hall were released, with the ones not there having confirmed alibis. So they take their prisoner to Sylvester, where Ferdinand has returned from the temple, and is there as well with Karstedt, Elvira, Florencia, and a bunch of other high-ranking nobles serving the Archduke. They confirm through evidence that Joisentak was there to kidnap Rosemine, but he speaks up in his defense that that wasn't his plan. He was gonna kidnap Charlotte, which, I don't know if anybody told him this, isn't any better, but what this does confirm is there's another noble criminal out there. They ask him who he was working with, but he says no one else. His plan was to kidnap either Wilfried or Charlotte, take them to a building he found in the forest, and then lead Rosemine there to rescue them, getting him into her good graces. I don't know if you can pick up on the nuance of this, but this was a dumb plan, sure to backfire, and full of holes from the start. But that was sort of the point. He's just a pawn in this, since someone asks where he got the devouring soldiers from, since, they're Bindewald's. He says Guy Gerlach gave them to him a long while ago. So with the name, and the interrogation, and Rosemary's brother's execution is set in stone. The next day, Guy Gerlach is called in, and they ask him where he got Bindewald's soldiers from. He plays dumb, but after they say the culprit pointed to him, he has an excuse already lined up. Bindewald brought in a lot more soldiers than he could actually take into the capital with him, so he left them at Gerlach's estate for safekeeping. And after he committed his crime, his family stopped contacting Gerlach as well, meaning he now had a bunch of soldiers whose contracts he couldn't cancel since Bindewald was still alive, but they were a drain on his finances, so he lent them to Joisentak. Bonifatius has some animal instinct type crap, because he can sense that this is a load of bullshit, but without evidence, it's not really worth bringing up in public. He pulls Sylvester into the mana replenishment room to talk it over with him afterwards, and as accurate as Bonifatius' hunches usually are, it pains Sylvester that they can't just say it was him and call it a day. But there are some hints here. Bonifatius was quite a bit older than Sylvester's father, so he received the full Archduke's training, meaning his father told him some of the castle secrets that most other people don't know. There's a hidden passage from the Grand Hall where they were at to that specific area in the forest, but they can't exactly say for certain that he used it. I mean, how would Gerlach even know about it? It's not like he's name sworn to a former Ehrenfest Archduke candidate who had the whole training too. Yeah, Georgine probably linked that information, but probably isn't good enough. So they just have to wait and see if any other shit gets pulled. Next is in place of my older sister from Charlotte's perspective as she struggles to fill in for Rosemine. What we readers know is she's a goofball who does everything on a whim, with others filling in to support her crazy ideas. But from Charlotte's perspective, she feels like she'll be able to measure up, until she tries to. Ferdinand says that she should repay Rosemine, rather than cry, so she's gonna cover all her religious obligations and playroom duties. She starts by volunteering for spring prayer, and that means she needs to learn to replenish mana. After some pushback, Sylvester agrees, and Ferdinand hands her and Wilfried plans for the playroom. Now Charlotte's told by Ferdinand that he doesn't think she'll be able to do as well as Rosemine did, but Charlotte thinks herself capable, and Rosemine did it at her age, so she should be fine. Or not. Turns out they're gonna have to process intel from the Royal Academy because remember, Rosemine offered to pay students there for information, so those kids are gonna have to get paid with money that she doesn't know where it comes from. Then they're gonna have to have more Eats Lead lessons, prepare sweets for the kids that do well in the playroom, and that's just the start. When the time comes, Charlotte indeed doesn't measure up. Felina approaches her about the books and asks when Rosemine will be better. But Charlotte can't make books herself, nor were her sweets as appreciated as Rosemine's, with Wilfried telling Charlotte not to get too down, as Rosemine's sweets are special. She invented them herself. Her temple attendants told him that. Next comes offering mana to the Foundation as practice for spring prayer, and that also doesn't go well for her. She struggles to use a face stone to offer mana, and despite Wilfried doing better this time around, Charlotte's frustrated that she's not measuring up to Rosemine at all. Especially after she learns that Rosemine does mana offering without a face stone. She imagined herself doing so much better, but that gap is wider than she thought. Sylvester says don't compare herself to Rosemine since it's her knowledge and mana that led to her adoption and her getting the title of saint. They honestly don't expect her to completely fill the hole Rosemine left, just for her to do her best. But despite that, she keeps feeling useless. Eventually, Ferdinand drops by to deliver some prayers to memorize, which floors Charlotte some more. There are 3 that are must know, 5 that would be nice to know, and 2 that are extra that would make them on par with Rosemine. Wilfried starts at the bare minimum, of course, because that's a good starting point, and he says that they have to work to catch up to her. Charlotte was feeling down that Rosemine was so far beyond her, that his words actually ended up giving her some hope, so she vows to catch up to both of them. As winter draws to a close and they're finally feeling like they're getting a grip on the playroom, there's the issue of selling materials that pops up again and catches Charlotte entirely off guard. Damiel's on top of it though and sends off an ordinance to Ferdinand, who secures the planting company for a visit. When it's time for her to do spring prayer, she's assigned Fran by Ferdinand, and he helps her by answering questions, mostly about Rosemine. Now their first stop is Haas, and upon arrival, she's changed into the High Bishop's ceremonial robes while Wilfried had to wear Mine's old apprentice robes. Though at least they did modify them for him. She's carried on stage to avoid dirtying them by Fran, and given a face stone with Rosemine's mana in it to offer for the prayer. After it's done, and even though she's more accustomed to offering mana, it's still a pretty tiring experience. Fran hands her a potion that's super nasty, despite it being the ones that are supposed to taste better, and lets her in on a little secret. Even Rosemine relies on potions to complete Spring Prayer because it's so damn hard. However, that just builds her up more in Charlotte's mind, so much so that she's less of a saint, and more like a goddess worthy of worship. Now that's what I call foreshadowing. Yeah, Charlotte's firmly in the Rosemine cult with Bonifacius the Grey Robes, and a few other nobles we've yet been introduced to. Next is 2 marriages from Guy Bilgner's perspective, and we're shotgunning this one, so buckle up. He's struggling quite a bit in the last 3 years after his father died and all the nobles left. And now Bridget's broken off her marriage and visiting the temple? Yeah, those are hard times. But Rosemine's protection has been helpful, though there are times he regrets it due to all the changes it's brought to Ilgner. But some good news, as the Starbind approaches, they've met their goals so they have enough money to buy Volk. He sets up a meeting with Ferdinand before the ceremony, sells the paper, and finalizes Volk's purchase. He affirms he's doing well to Gil, who attended the meeting too, so that puts the temple people at ease. At this point, Rosemine's showing no signs of waking anytime soon, and despite Volk wanting Rosemine to be the one to bless their wedding, Karya's impatience will push the marriage through before she wakes up. Ferdinand ends this conversation with a bit of advice that was talked about earlier this volume, that Guy Bilgner is too straightforward for a noble, and he needs to learn how nobles operate a bit more, which he gratefully accepts, since no one really wants to tell that to a Guy besides someone in Ferdinand's position, and they would usually rather exploit them than educate them. So, he appreciates it. Over to his winter mansion, Bridget is already there, and he informs her that Volk has been purchased. He asks her what her plans are this year for the Starbind, and she in turn asks what he thinks about Damiel. He approves of him as a man, but as for mana? Well, last year, childbirth was just barely possible between them, but now this year, they're nearly equals. Meaning, hey, it's a go on that front. Rosemine's mana compression method is well known by this point, but only a few so far have actually been taught it, so this is just basically advertising. In the end, it's up to her whether she wants to accept Damiel's proposal or not. But the real issue is what marriage actually means. When discussed at a tea party, Bridget intends to marry Damiel into her family. Her brother's shocked by that, but logically speaking, it makes sense. They'd have to buy a home in the noble quarter with barely a garden, but more importantly, she'd be stepping down in status to a lay noble. Damiel's getting a hell of a deal here marrying into hers and becoming a med noble. Elvira simply said though that this would be a good test of his love for her. And this was actually a test that Bridget failed. Yeah, she herself is not a landowning noble, so not being dedicated to her charge and being more dedicated to her province is a problem. And this is Elvira's way of getting rid of her while testing Damiel as well. So her brother warns her not to resent Damiel if he chooses not to go through with their engagement. The night finally comes, and it's how you'd expect at this point. Damiel proposes again with a crowd forming to see this anticipated event, and she basically asks him to go to Ilgner with her. But he refuses after a long hard pause. His reason? Because he's Rosemine's guard knight. Now, Elvira was behind her, giving Damiel an evil look this whole time, and since Bridget finally gets that she's been cut off now, Elvira makes a public display, saying she'll find her a husband who will support Ilgner. Mostly because Rosemine wishes for Bridget's happiness, so needing to stay on good terms with Elvira, Guy Bilgner accepts her offer. Next is no rest for us from Lutz's perspective. He's given Mine's letters from Gil and heads straight to her parents' house to read them. One's for Lutz saying she'll be asleep for a while because of the potion and to take care of the workshop, while the family one says she'll be fine and not to worry. But in the stack is one from Fran that they have a hard time with. So Lutz has to be the one to translate the euphemism since he spent so much time with Grey Robes and Ilgner. Fran explains the gravity of the situation, because Mine wrote these letters before she was poisoned. So Lutz tells him that Ferdinand thinks she'll be asleep for over a year, so this hits her family pretty hard. All while Camille is asking if Lutz brought a toy or something. He's gonna ask Gil for more details, but Mine's family is just thankful for all that he's done for them. He's given a sausage and drops it off at his family's house since they need it more than he does. It's here we get a glimpse just how much life has changed for Lutz and Mine's family, that they're both doing well financially. Hell, Lutz could afford a bigger place for himself and his family with a servant to do his chores, but that would make delivering letters kinda hard. Mine's family is in a similar boat, but they don't want to leave the apartment that has all their memories of her. Even after Gunther's promotion, Thule's Laharel contract, and Effa's advancements next part, they still won't leave their house. Ralph gives Lutz a little bit of shit over how close he is to Thule, since Ralph has a crush on her. But that's pretty much out the window, since Thule is so absorbed in her work. Everyone also starts to assume that she and Lutz are going to be a thing at this point, despite misreading their situation entirely. Lutz is only doing all this stuff with Thule for Mine, and Thule's the same way. Hell, Rel's chances to talk to Thule are gone in spring when she moves into the Gilberta company. It's only taking so long because they're short on space, mostly because Benno hasn't fully moved into his new store yet. The next day, Benno tells Lutz to inform the Gutenbergs to focus on their current projects, since now that Rosemine's asleep, they can actually get a handle on their workloads. Lutz isn't too pleased about the nonchalant attitude, but at least he understands what he's getting at. So Lutz summons all the Gutenbergs. Yeah, Zach, Johann, Ingo, Heidi, Joseph, Gil, and Fritz for a meeting to discuss the future. They all have their plates full, with Ingo developing high-density bookshelves, Heidi working on ink for the Ilgner paper, Johann doing type and pumps, while Zach has spring mattresses and carriage suspension to work on. Johann's pretty much the only one having a meltdown about his workload, while the rest have embraced it. Though they point out that maybe Johann should train a successor to help, that way he won't be overwhelmed when Rosemine wakes up. When spring comes, books are on hold despite having the material. They're written how people talk, not how books are actually written, and no one besides Rosemine knows how to edit. But Thule has a book that Rosemine wrote for her, so Lutz goes to borrow it for reference, but Thule wants something in return. She wants to learn etiquette from a shrine maiden, so she'll be ready to visit Rosemine when she wakes up. Hey, she's getting a head start on this, and Karina's gonna be pleased too, which gives Lutz an idea to learn more himself. So he informs Benno that he and Thule will be going to the orphanage to get high-class etiquette beaten into them during spring, and Benno tells him that's a great idea. Yeah, if only he could have sent more people. So they go about that. But in fall, Benno summons the Gutenbergs again for a big announcement. Elvira is shoving through a print workshop in her home province of Haldensel, so that means they're all packing up and heading there to teach the locals how to make the press, type, ink and such, pretty much everything they'll need. But it's so far north, papermaking is out of the question, since it takes so long for their rivers to thaw, plus they're busy there year-round. This comes out of nowhere and is a huge shock to everyone, but you can't really tell an archnoble no, so they're suddenly stupidly busy. Next up is Meanwhile at the Temple from Fran's perspective. Settle in because this is a fucking monster. This side story literally covers everything that happened during her sleep at the temple. As soon as Rosemine's asleep in her Chariv, Ferdinand sealed the room so that only he could enter, meaning Rosemine is finally safe. It falls onto Fran to organize the notes that she left and deliver tasks to the relevant parties. While Ferdinand is at the castle, Fran and Zom are delivering the documents he'll need to assume her duties to his room. It's about here we get why Zom likes Rosemine so much. He served Shiksa before Ferdinand, much like Fritz did, so he understands the difference a competent master makes. On top of her actively working to relieve Ferdinand's workload since she was a blue shrine maiden. So yeah, it's not just that she's on top of things, make sure that her attendants are actually noticed for their work, but she also recognizes Ferdinand needs help too. Her forethought in having Ferdinand train Blue Priest to assist him will make her sleep run a lot smoother than if Ferdinand was still doing all the work alone. Wilma's a bit more of a mess since she's assuming the worst, that without Rosemine awake, the orphanage will return to how it was, but Fran puts her at ease, saying that the High Priest is overseeing her money minus the guild card, so there really shouldn't be any financial issues. Rosemine has Hugo and Ella work on a recipe book, with Nicola learning to cook under them while doing the actual writing of the recipes since they can't read. And Rosina will be teaching the orphans to play music to secure them better treatment outside the temple if they're bought. So pretty much everybody's gonna remain busy despite Rosemine being asleep. Before long, it's time for the dedication ritual, and the blue robes are helping out this time. A lot more than Freetac and Camphor. Ferdinand returns with a bag of face stones and goes right into the hidden room to dump them into the Rosemine soup. Its color had turned a deep blue while he was away, because it's implied the potion sucks out the excess mana when dissolving the clumps, and due to how much Rosemine compresses her mana, there's a lot just floating there. The face stones absorb it, and that's the face stones they'll be using for the dedication ritual, as well as spring prayer for Charlotte and Wilfried. Even when unconscious and healing, she's still a battery. When the dedication ritual is over, the workload is piling up, because now Ferdinand is in charge of the planting company, workshop, and orphanage stuff. That's all the work that the Blue Robes couldn't handle, and this is on top of other duties that Sylvester's unloading onto him too. So that means they need to call in the big guns, and Eustace shows up right on time. He's put in charge of the workshop, which delights him to no end, but he's not there every day. He only comes by every so often to knock out the paperwork and head home. When it's time for spring, Ferdinand is working to prop up Charlotte as well. He has Fran try and spread word of another saint who stepped up to help the duchy when Rosemine was poisoned to repay her noble deed. And while Fran's a bit hesitant to exploit the children of the Archduke, Ferdinand brushes it off, saying the orphanage will be the one to suffer if they don't prop them up and make them confident enough to perform the Harvest Festival. We learn that Richt was initially scared when he saw Charlotte instead of Rosemine, because he thought they hadn't been forgiven. Fran sorted that situation out though, saying they're getting a proper prayer this year from St. Charlotte, in Rosemine's stead. Gunther asks Fran when receiving their extra compensation how the High Bishop's doing, but she's still showing no signs of awakening. But a major takeaway from this experience for Fran was just how weak Rosemine was, considering Charlotte barely used the potions, while Rosemine needed a ton. In spring, Nicola came of age, and she was sad she didn't get any new recipes as a gift, but Ella cheered her up, providing sweets, and saying she could ask for them when Rosemine wakes up. About that time, the Italian restaurant came back looking for new recipes themselves, but they were told they'd have to invent their own, which becomes a bit of a minor plot point down the line. Oh, and Hugo gets fired up for a competition with Lise about this. In summer, Bridget was relieved of duty shortly after the Starbind to return to Ilgner so she could prepare for her upcoming marriage. Daniel was depressed, but Ferdinand said it would have been a tough marriage from the start. We'll be getting into that a bit later in the video. But right as Daniel is moping about this, Hugo and Ella come up to tell Fran they're getting married too. Now his first instinct is Ella's gonna quit after she gets married to have kids. But that's not how commoner marriages work, which is a culture shock, as priests don't generally know about marriage, but what little they do know about marriage comes from nobles. So they don't know shit about commoners. So he tells them that they can't get married just yet. Rosemine's gonna have to approve of their marriage, so they're gonna have to wait. Ella's not super bothered by that, but Hugo's right pissed off. Summer ends and it's time for the new ink and improved playing cards to hit the market, which is neat because these look really high quality. But around time for the Harvest Festival, Egmont approaches Fran for a new shrine maiden to replace his current one. Her name's Lily, and she got pregnant. This is an issue because, as we know, the transfer of Grey Robes is Ferdinand's jurisdiction, not Fran's, and Egmont's there demanding a new one. So Zom gets Ferdinand, who tells him to buzz off and schedule a proper meeting with him. When talking with Fran about it after Egmont leaves, he tells him to prepare a new shrine maiden following as close to Rosemine's wishes as possible. Last we heard, she didn't want any shrine maidens forced to offer flowers like Wilma was. Well, could have been, but some of them have Delia's mindset, so they approach the situation like that. Fran has the unfortunate job of delivering this decision to Wilma, but he handles it shockingly different than how she expected. They line up all the adult shrine maidens, and he asks who wants to be Egmont's mistress. 4 raise their hands, and those are who he wants to present to Egmont, baffling Wilma, but in a good way. Egmont's a bit disappointed by the slim selection, but takes a new one and has his old shrine maiden taken to the orphanage where Wilma helps her readjust. And just to be clear, there was a lot of emotional abuse in this situation, so Wilma's handling of this situation is pretty damn good. However, the issue comes up at childbirth again, and when Fran asks Ferdinand what they should do, he says ignore it and the baby will be born on its own terms. No, that's not how that works. Tully loses her shit having experienced one already with her mom, and tells them that childbirth is a huge fucking ordeal, one that's gonna require help. Since none of the Grey Robes there know how to do it, they simply need to take her to where Grey Robes do. And that would just so happen to be Haas's orphanage, since some of the girls over there have helped out before. So for the Harvest Festival, they take the pregnant shrine maiden Lily to Haas, so they have experienced people there to help her give birth before she's too far along to make the trip. They're expecting that to happen sometime in spring. After the Harvest Festival, Elvira wants something printed before socializing, but that definitely won't happen with Haldenzell still under works. So that means it falls onto the Rosemine workshop. They're willing to take it, and Gil knows just how to handle the order. Fritz approaches Benno while the rest are jumping on it, and asks him about winter prep. And really, this conversation is just to show how well their working relationship has developed. And after Benno leaves, we see how well the orphanage flows now, with even Rosina helping to make stencils, while Fran and Wilma do the winter prep list. Things move a lot quicker in this second year, with Thule proposing an etiquette book, Benno rushing around to satisfy Elvira, but in spring they have to help Lily give birth in Haas. So Wilma is forced to go by a scary-ass Benno because she's in charge of the orphanage, and Benno's not going to help them the next time this happens. And believe me, it will happen again. So she needs to go, observe, help, gain the knowledge to do this in the orphanage, and mostly just get over her androphobia. There's a sweet line I want to include to put Wilma at ease from Thule, saying none of the soldiers there would dare lay a hand on them since their father is with them. And Wilma knows exactly who she's referring to, Gunther, because it's not just Thule's father, but also really Rosemine's, so she knows she's safe. When word comes back that the baby was born just fine and they're supposed to return to the orphanage, Fran sees Wilma looking a lot better after having experienced the outside world. Later on that season, Rosemine is starting to show signs of waking, but by fall, Ferdinand is stopping by every few days to check on her. Yeah, even during the Harvest Festival. And after the festival is finally over, she awakes. Next is the lay noble guard knight from Daniel's perspective after he turned down Bridget during the Starbind. His brother Henrik and his wife are scolding him for being a fucking idiot and shaming himself even further than he already has, as well as Bridget. The issue is, Daniel thought all he needed to do was increase his mana, then they could get married no problem. They'd just get a house in the noble quarter and serve Rosemine happily ever after. But that was really naive on his part, about as naive as Bridget's perspective, where she assumed that Daniel would move to Ilgner and they'd live happily ever after there. There was a key breakdown in communication during this romantic bout between them, where Bridget never intended to leave Ilgner, and Daniel can't leave Rosemine. No, not won't, he can't. If he tries, he'll be killed. Elvira's look to him that night pretty much guaranteed that. It's also not his first hint. So Daniel's whole plan was for Bridget to marry into his family, which is fucking stupid. Yeah, there's no med nobles out there who would marry down to a lay noble, especially a bottom of the barrel one like Daniel's that's leaning on a commoners for financial support. Like, she wouldn't be able to act like family with her family after that status shift. They explain that it's roughly the same as Daniel marrying down to a rich commoner family. It's just not gonna happen. Getting some nobles into Ilgner, especially another med knight who can do scholar work like Daniel, would be a huge boon for the province as they're short-staffed at the moment. But Daniel is such a dolt, he didn't even research Bridget's family or Ilgner. He was just focused on having a wife and getting more mana. But Henrik's a pretty smart dude, who realizes this was an issue of communication between them, and tells him to go apologize to Bridget the next time he sees her and try to explain the situation. At the temple, they talk things out, and it turns out both of their brothers pointed out the fact that neither of them considered the other's circumstances. Bridget didn't realize Daniel couldn't leave Rosemine's service so easily, and Daniel didn't realize how dedicated Bridget was to Ilgner. They confirm one last time, asking if things could work out, and neither of them can budge an inch. So, it's over. Elvira is going to introduce Bridget to someone from her faction, so Bridget's going to resign her post, and she basically says goodbye. After Bridget resigns, Bonifatius unwittingly throws salt in the wound by congratulating Daniel on being so loyal. But, silver lining, he at least gained the respect of his bosses by declining the marriage. And then it's back to training. And lastly, we've got one handful of a chef from Ella's perspective. Hugo's down after having failed his competition with Lise. The reason being he made food Rosemine would like, not food that would sell well in the Italian restaurant. So Ella's trying to cheer him up, but it takes a while for him to snap out of it. Finally, she distracts him with peeling potato fells, but Nicola's really the one who got him working, by saying she'll have to tell Fran to send Hugo back to the lower city since he's too down to work. The thing is, Ella's crushing on Hugo pretty hard in this side story, because he's actually kinda cool when he's in his element. When he starts to get down in the dumps thinking about the competition again, Ella pulls him back up by telling him what he's good at and how he's improved. That makes Hugo offhandedly ask if she wants to get married. She's happy he asked, but it's sort of awkward. Nicola's underage and super sheltered, and she's in the room staring at them the whole time. So, it'd be nice if he'd put off asking that until after work at least. So he does, and Ella says yes. That's the story of how they got engaged. Wow, that was a lot of side story content. And my minor gripe having to make a video on it was none of this was easy to like gloss over because it's so packed full of details that are important. I kind of have to touch on like everything. So with a 2-year nap for Rosemine, there's a lot of crap she missed. And the other characters aren't exactly in cryostasis while she's asleep. Their lives go on too, so of course we need to see that, especially as some of these plot lines have implications in part 4. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk my feelings so we can wrap up this video. It's been long enough. Volume 5 is really the capstone of this story to date. So many plot threads ending and callbacks happen in this volume that the continuity feels incredibly solid. But mostly I love how this part expanded on the smaller bits of world building introduced in part 1 and 2. From the religious ceremonies from not just the noble's perspective, but the farmers as well, and how dangerous a capable noble plotter actually is. That last one's been talked up. And Bezewanst was essentially the one behind Mind's issues in part 2. He underestimated her and wasn't great to begin with, as he basically only had one real move, go cry to Veronica. So seeing a situation similar to the end of part 2 where Rosemine's attacked, kidnapped, saved, and fights for her life once again, demonstrates a few key points. One, when a noble knows how to set up proper pawns and use them to their fullest is working to hurt you, it can be extremely dangerous. But also Rosemine's handling of the situation as well. She wasn't an object being attacked and acted upon like in last part. She was the goal. She had to take action to put herself in danger, and her recklessness is what ultimately caused her harm. And again, her connections and friendships are what saved the day in the end, rather than Sylvester wanting to use her and Ferdinand being more interested in Veronica's downfall. Mind being saved was a benefit, but not really their aim in part 2. This time it definitely is. Hell, you can see how upset Ferdinand and Sylvester are. That's pretty much why I feel this is basically the same situation as part 2's ending, just handled better. It has more of a reason to happen with the parties involved all having a stake in this fight. Mana compression was a pretty big aspect in this book. Ferdinand was keen on learning Rosemine's method as soon as possible so he could test some things. His main goal is to see how it impacts the mana of those outside their growth period. Now, this is something I kinda wanted to talk about. That'd be a hell of a breakaway from the synopsis, so let's do it here. Now, why would mana compression affect adults done growing? If we think about the concept of mana compression as one grows, like a house being built, you'll naturally add rooms as you grow, so that means you'll fill them too. Compounded by the fact that the more rooms you can fill, the more you'll add. So your house is naturally growing as you do, but you can make it grow faster by accumulating more stuff, or mana in this metaphor. But when looking at adults, their metaphorical houses are already completed. They can't add more rooms on, but that's not to say they can't reorganize their stuff to fit more in. More effective mana compression helps adults by fitting more into their vessel, rather than growing their vessel entirely. Or I guess in other words, the density rather than the capacity, which leads to more mana in reserves when it's needed. So yeah, there's definitely merit to learning Rosemine's method even as an adult. This goes beyond that too. Since mana capacity affects pregnancy chances, a lay noble with a higher than average capacity compressing their mana could theoretically conceive with a lower capacity med noble not compressing theirs, or if they expelled it beforehand. This is most likely how blue robes knock up gray shrine maidens by accident. After expelling their mana, they do the deed, and now their mana capacity is closer to that of a commoner than an actual noble. And yeah, their mana was already low to begin with. So Rosemine's method won't just help kids learn to compress their mana, it would lead to nobles able to provide more mana for their children while carrying them, thus giving them a higher capacity at the start, and allowing them to compress in school for further growth. Now this has been a bit of speculation, but let's go a step further. Generations down the line, Ehrenfest could probably have very few lay nobles and mostly med and arch noble families. So yeah, that's why Ferdinand really wants to spread this as soon as possible. Back in volume 2 of this part, I mentioned there's two pivotal moments that define Wilfrid's character growth. The first was his stint as the High Bishop where he learned how inadequate he was, but this volume was his second. This is where he learned the key message about perspectives and other people's truths. Why this is important is we see how Sylvester rules as the Archduke, where he listens to multiple sides of the story before making a decision. He did this with Bezewanst and Bindewald in part 2, before asking Mind and Ferdinand for their perspectives. So him learning this lesson is a key shift in him growing and learning a vital skill to rule the duchy. Further, this setback is a stain on his record, as he's now a criminal working to regain his honor from this point on. And yeah, that's gonna be an uphill battle, as people won't respect him like they did before. Now he has to earn their respect. And he's still far from perfect going forward, but there's a marked change where he's a bit more humble. This is where he transitions from an early part 2 Gil clone, being an insufferable blonde boy with a penchant for being an asshole, to standing on his own as a character. He still has the status and sincerity, but he's more humble and willing to get both sides of the story. I will point out though that he's still dense, and that's a character flaw he has to overcome. It also leads to tension down the line in a good way. This volume saw a few lesser noticed aspects of the secondary cast. Bridget's been a mainstay for 5 volumes now, and that's a good chunk of the series to this point, but her time in the spotlight was really only in the last 2 books. It is a bit disheartening to see her exit from the story on such sad terms, where her budding romance with Daniel was cut tragically short, but ultimately it's for the best, for pretty much everyone involved. Like, their romance seems plausible until you realize they're just the only 2 eligible people close enough in status at their job. When Henrik points out how little Daniel knows about Bridget or Ilgner, and how Bridget didn't care enough about Daniel's circumstances beyond not inheriting anything from his family and has enough mana, shows their relationship was founded on fuck all to begin with. In Earth terms, they're 2 late teenagers at a part-time job looking to move in together. To be honest, the 2 really didn't have anything in common. It sort of feels like a spite against shippers that it didn't work out, and on my first read, I'll admit, I thought it was a super cute romance, and sad that it ended on bad terms. But paying more attention to it on subsequent reads, you see Elvira was constantly testing Bridget to see how dedicated she was to Rosemine. You see how Bridget's brother and Henrik could tell this marriage would never work, but didn't really want to interfere in their siblings' lives. Even though as the respective heads of household, they probably should have. But this whole experience wasn't done purely to shit on the readers for getting invested. It's meant to show that marriage is political in this world, the various impacts a relationship can have. Just seeing Bridget could have lowered herself in status and been unable to keep her friends and family is a kick in the teeth. But mostly we see that love isn't what drives relationships in this society. We've been told as such, but here's the concrete example of why. And following a doomed relationship that the audience is invested in is what hits that point home. That's why this is effective. It's also this volume we really see who Elvira is. We knew she was a capable archnoble, but how effective she is at weaving plots and pushing things in her favor without others noticing is really astounding. It speaks to just how capable she is, and how lucky Karstedt is to have her. I would say she's pretty damn close to Ferdinand's level of skill. She'd been playing Bridget for a long time to see where she stood, feel her out, and also set up her downfall from the earliest stages in part 3. Why? Not because she's cruel, but because she could see that she wasn't a good fit for Rosemine. This is why Angelica will go so far, and really with Bridget stepping down and Rosemine being asleep for 2 years, it works out perfect that Angelica's last year in the Royal Academy just so happens to be the year Rosemine wakes up, so they won't have to find an adult woman to guard her in the temple. This may sound a bit odd to say, but now that we've finished part 3, this wraps up what's essentially the prologue of this entire story. I know, that sounds crazy. We're 12 volumes in, but all that we've gone through would have been maybe the prologue chapter, or if they're lucky, the first half of the first volume in any other isekai series. Yeah, part 1 maybe would have been a paragraph, part 2 would have been a few pages, and part 3 would have been the focus for like a chapter. But these last 12 books have been the backbone of this story and characters. It introduced us to who Mine is, her development so we understand why she acts a certain way, especially with those she considers family. We get the background of the religion of this world, the societal structure from lowly craftsmen and soldiers to high-end merchants, the economy, the priest caste, and the upper rungs of nobility, even getting great detail on how each strata acts, their customs, their unique culture, and relationships with one another. This is the groundwork for the larger story that unfolds in part 4 and 5, where Rosemine's influence spreads outside of Ehrenfest, essentially the context for why we should care about the political moves made in the Royal Academy. And without this much groundwork, there's a lot that would feel confusing or just plain thrown at us, as the High Bishop's Bible, the conflict with the King and Church, the unease in Arnsbach, and how shady Rosemine's actions seem within that context wouldn't feel nearly as natural. But rather than throwing everything at us with lore dumps and flashbacks, the author chose to incorporate this all into the story being told. Instead of, say for example, showing Benno in part 4 with the explanation that he's a merchant who did business with Rosemine, we saw firsthand her meeting with him, gaining his trust, building a working relationship, learning under him, and just how close they are. I really can't stress enough how smart it was to take what amounts to the juicy bits of this story, the magic and country-spanning conflicts that any other writer would have focused on immediately, and pushing all that off until 12 or more volumes down the line. To start the story off with the framing that magic is so ingrained but far removed from the general populace of this world, and our protagonist is so sheltered she didn't even know this was a fantasy world until the second volume of this story? Hell, that magic doesn't even play a strong role in this series until the end of the 5th volume, and isn't something commonplace in Mind's life until volume 8. In essence, and I've said this before, the author took what most other isekai writers take for granted and told this story about how their character became awesome, rather than rushing to that point, while keeping their protagonist relatable, flawed, but enjoyable, and a person we want to see succeed. By focusing on the characters, Mind's goals, and the slow building of her new life in this world while exploring it organically, takes not just a lot of faith by the publisher, but a lot of restraint on the writer's part. Knowing she had all this cool stuff down the line, and having the forethought to keep that feed of information slow, steady, and logical, really elevates the storytelling. And now that we're having a chance to look back at the previous 3 parts, I can't help but appreciate it. So yeah, this is the foundation of everything moving forward. All while the plots and struggles Rosemine was wrapped up in to this point were the prelude to the real issues she'll be facing from now on. That's why I say this is pretty much the intro to this series, as part 4 and 5 make up the next 2/3 of the volume count. The ends of parts always mark a huge shift in the story. That's probably why they're distinguished as parts. Rosemine's now facing a whole new world with familiar faces who have lived 2 whole years without her. How will she react upon seeing Charlotte and Wilfried? Or how about attending the Royal Academy when she's barely socialized outside her family? These are the challenges she'll be facing next volume, as our little bookworm goes to school and becomes the founding member of the new library committee, as well as revolutionizes the political landscape of the country as a whole. But for now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with the link down in the description, and if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to Robin DBL and HonorWolf01 for their continued support. Thanks for watching.